An overview of theme D. This is everything we could be asked in the AQA exam about theme D, religion, peace and conflict. And in this video, we're going to be applying the key content and the key quotes to some past paper practice questions. So let me just share with you now those 13 questions. As you can see, we're starting with a couple of 1-mark questions. We'll then be taking a look at some 2-markers, some 4-markers, and we've got 2 5-markers on there. And then we're finishing with 2 12-mark questions as well. So this video is very much about honing and developing our exam technique to be working towards those grade 9s. Now, you are very welcome to get yourself a copy of the past paper practice questions booklet if you just click on the link in the description box below. So you'll be able to work through the questions as we discuss them. There is room for each question. Or on each question, I should say, for you to have a go at answering. You might want to pause the video before we talk through it, for example. And then there is also room for you to make notes. So you can add in key quotes, for example, as we discuss them. So yes, 13 very interesting questions for us to discuss. I thought we could start, though, with a look at the theme D key terms, which I really think are key to maximising our marks in this exam. You know, not only for our question 1, when we've got to identify a key term, but then also in questions 2, 3, 4 and 5, knowing our key terms will really help us to secure those top marks in this GCSE. So let's talk through them in alphabetical order, shall we? So conflict is the first one. It means dispute between sides. It can be between individuals, groups or nations. Forgiveness, a really important key term for theme D. It means letting go of blame against a person for wrongs they have done. It means moving on. Holy war, then, is war that is believed to be sanctioned by God, and we will be talking about that quite a bit today. Justice means bringing fairness back to a situation. Just war is a set of rules for fighting a war in a way, believed to be justified and acceptable to God. And we'll be looking at Christian teachings about just war and Islamic teachings about just war. Nuclear deterrence, that means having nuclear weapons with the aim of deterring or preventing other states from attacking for fear of retaliation and nuclear war, which would lead to what we call mutually assured destruction, which basically means the end of the world, because if a nuclear war began, everything and everybody would be destroyed. So the idea of nuclear deterrence is that you have the weapons to stop other people using them against you, because they know that if they use their nuclear weapons against you, you would retaliate with your own, and that would cause mutually assured destruction. And then nuclear weapons and war as a key term. It's a weapon of mass destruction, which causes widespread damage and loss of life. Nuclear war would be a war fought using these weapons. And as we say, it is very likely to lead to mutually assured destruction, aka the end of the world. So there's a happy thought for the day. President Putin, I hope you're listening. So pacifism is the belief that all violence is wrong, which then affects all behaviours. And we'll be looking at Christian pacifists and also Muslim pacifists, such as Muhammad Ali. We'll be looking at peace, the opposite of war. It means harmony between all in society. Peacemaking, then, is the process of working to bring about peace and reconciliation. Protest is a statement or action to express disagreement. It can be an organised event to demonstrate disagreement with a policy or political action. Reconciliation means making up and rebuilding relationships between 2 groups or sides after disagreement. So important we know that forgiveness means letting go of blame and moving on, whereas reconciliation is more. It means rebuilding and re-establishing those relationships. Retaliation, then, is to pay someone back for their harmful actions. So the idea of an eye for an eye. And terrorism, the use of violence and threats to intimidate others, to cause terror. It's used for political purposes, to build fear in the ordinary population and to secure demands potentially from the government. Just a couple more key terms: the victims of war, those who are harmed during a war, for example, those killed, injured or left homeless. And we'll be looking at how religious groups help the victims of war. Violence is behaviour involving physical force which intends to hurt, kill or cause damage. War, which we'll be talking about a lot today, is armed conflict between 2 or more sides. And finally, weapons of mass destruction, which is one of our contrasting beliefs topics. Weapons which can cause widespread, indiscriminate damage. And that means basically that the damage cannot be controlled. There is no discrimination. For example, innocent people would be killed. And this is why it may fall short of Aquinas's just war theory. So I now want to share with you some key quotes that you could use for each of the topics on the spec. So when we're in that exam room, no matter what questions come up, we have got a bank of quotes we are ready to use to ensure we get full marks, that we get that grade 9 as a result of our efforts. So here is the table for Christianity. Now, if you have got the booklet in front of you, you will find on page 5, there is space for you to now fill in the key quotes for Christianity and then Islam, which we'll talk about in just a moment. You do not need to know loads of quotes for each topic, obviously. I would say if you know one Christian quote and one Islamic quote for each of these topics, then you can be really confident going into that exam that you'll be able to get full marks on your 5-mark question, for example, and you'll be able to get the top marks in your 12-mark question as well. So let's have a look. So peace, justice, forgiveness, and reconciliation. Well, Jesus said, forgive not 7, but 77 times. He didn't mean that literally 77 count, but he's saying that to illustrate how many times you should forgive, how important it is. He also said in his Sermon on the Mount, one of the most important quotes for this theme, he said, blessed are the peacemakers. And we'll use that quote again and again. So get that on a post-it note, get it stuck on the wall. St. Paul, another quote that we'll use again and again, he wrote, live at peace with everyone, a fantastic quote for this theme to remember and use. And then also the parable of the prodigal son is a really important teaching of the New Testament about the importance of forgiveness and reconciliation. Violence then, including violent protest. Jesus said, put your sword back in its place. However, he also did use violence himself. So the story of him cleansing the temple includes the line, Jesus overturned the tables. So he didn't just protest against people selling things and commercializing the temple space, but he actually used violence. He overturned the tables as part of his protest. And obviously Jesus, as a key role model for Christians, does that say that in some circumstances you can use violence as part of protest? Do not kill, the 10 Commandments tell us. Of course they do. So you could say, violent protest is wrong because there is a danger that you could kill somebody, that there could be loss of life. Martin Luther King Jr. has a brilliant quote that we'll come back to again and again today. He said, we must use the weapon of love. You shouldn't be using violence. You shouldn't be using war and conflict. You should use love as your weapon. And Jesus also says, of course, turn the other cheek. Terrorism then, a key quote for you, do not kill. And we know that terrorism is about causing terror, causing harm. It's about the loss of innocent life. War and pacifism. So I've sort of combined those topics together just to, make our revision more efficient, if you like. So Jesus says, as we know, blessed are the peacemakers. Pope Francis, interestingly, said that wars are always madness. That's quite a good quote. If you're asked in an exam, wars are always wrong. Well, Pope Francis is saying, yes, they are. However, this is interesting because then the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which of course he's in charge of, actually says there are strict conditions when war is justified under just war theory, which is developed by St. Thomas Aquinas. So the Catechism of the Church actually says there are strict conditions when war is justifiable, and we'll talk about them later on. Martin Luther King Jr. again said use the weapon of love. So war would be wrong. You need to use love to resolve your disputes. It's all about reconciliation. It's about conversation. It's about working with people, not going to war against them. St. Paul said submit to the governing authority. So that would be used if the government have declared war. And so a Christian should support them because St. Paul is saying submit to your government. The Quakers, however, are a Christian group who under no circumstances would support war. We call them conscientious objectors, if you'd like the technical term. And the Quakers say, Quakers utterly deny all outward wars. And then again, do not kill from the commandments. We know that war leads to the loss of life, and that goes against one of the 10 commandments given by God. Weapons of mass destruction then. St. Paul says submit to the governing authority. So again, you know, the UK government, for example, has the Trident nuclear program. If your government believes that nuclear weapons are needed, you should support them. However, Pope Benedict, the previous Pope, said in a nuclear war, there would be no victors, only victims. So if there was a nuclear war, nobody would win. Everybody would be a victim. So that would suggest it is wrong to have these weapons because they are just going to cause pain. There is no advantage to anybody. Peacemaking then, again, that classic key quote, blessed are the peacemakers, says Jesus. Another great quote, one I personally used in my GCSE RE exam many times and got an A star, by the way, in the days of A stars, was Christ has no body but yours. The idea that Jesus is known as the Prince of Peace, and you must take on that role in the world today. You must do Jesus's work. You must do God's work in the world. You must make efforts. You must build peace. You must help people because Christ has no body but yours. And that is the prayer of St. Teresa of Avila. Another one that's about peacemaking, it's actually all about acting and taking responsibility for working towards peace, is St. Augustine. He said, pray as though everything depends on God, work as though everything depends on you. So you need to put in the effort to work for peace, to bring about peace in the world. St. Paul, of course, said, live at peace with everyone. And Jesus said, forgive not 7, but 77 times. So again, the importance of peacemaking in Christianity. Just an important point as well to make you aware of is that our key organization working for peace, we can say for Christianity, is Pax Christi. So if you are asked to name drop an organization, Pax Christi is a good one to choose. Okay, how about our Islamic quotes now then? So, peace, justice, forgiveness, and reconciliation. Well, the Hadiths say, forgive others and God will forgive you. Surah 39 says God is the most forgiving, the most merciful, those key qualities of God. The Hadiths say that whoever makes reconciliation, his reward is from God. So again, that idea that if you forgive others and you make reconciliation with others, God will do the same for you or with you after death. Surah 23, a great quote here, say words of peace. So we can use that as well for peacemaking later on. And then Surah 8, if the enemy is inclined towards peace, make peace with them. So again, the importance of peace. And remember the word Islam, you know, it means peace. So peace is at the core of this religion. What about violence and violent protests then? Well, Muhammad Ali said this, and this is a brilliant quote for this theme that I really encourage you to remember, write it down, get it on a poster. It is this: Islam is peace and not violence. Really easy to remember, really easy to write and use in your responses. Surah 2 says, and this is a quote that we'll use to talk about just war in Islam, fight in the way of God those who fight you, but do not transgress. Now, transgress means do not go too far. Say words of peace, again, Surah 23, so that would suggest that violence is wrong. And then Surah 17, we've used this quote for other themes, says, do not take life, which God has made sacred. So the idea of the sanctity of life. Violent protest means there is a risk to life that you could cause harm to somebody. You have to remember the sanctity of life. Terrorism, whoever has killed a soul, it is though he has killed all mankind. So again, the idea that killing people is wrong. And then do not kill yourself or others, Surah 4. I thought that's quite interesting because we see a lot of terrorism involves suicide bombers, doesn't it? That those who are detonating the explosives are killing themselves in the process. And that's interesting because Surah 4 says, do not kill yourself or others. So I thought that's quite a relevant quote there. War then, so fight in the way of God, those who fight you, but do not transgress. So that would suggest holy war is acceptable. There are certain reasons you can be involved in war, but you must not go too far. And we'll be asking, what does that mean? You know, what do you mean when you say go too far? What are the conditions for conflict? We'll talk about that. Surah 4, do not kill yourself or others. Muhammad Ali, Islam is peace and not violence. He was famously a pacifist. Surah 9 verse 5 is used by some to justify religious or holy war. So the verse we'll talk about says, kill the polytheists wherever you find them. So we'll talk about different interpretations of that, and how that might have been used to justify war by some people. And then also another great example is the Prophet Muhammad, who is of course the key role model and the key exemplar for Muslims. He fought in just wars himself. Excuse me, I can't speak. I need some green tea. So we can say this shows Muslims it can sometimes be acceptable because he is described by the Quran as the perfect man, that he embodies all the qualities that a good Muslim should have, hence the fact that the hadiths and the sunnah teach Muslims about his words and his actions. He is the key example to follow, and he actually fought in just wars himself. Okay, what about weapons of mass destruction? Well, Surah 2 says, fight in the way of God those who fight you, but do not transgress. And could weapons of mass destruction be a transgression? Could they be going too far? Because, Surah 17 says, do not take life which God has made sacred. Another really interesting quote I thought was relevant here is the hadith that says, God has appointed you his stewards. Remember when we looked at the key terms for weapons of mass destruction and how they can destroy environments as well, the impact on the world. So it's not just human life that is damaged by these weapons, but it is the world. And of course, we know from theme B that Muslims are to be caliphs, to be good stewards. And then finally, peacemaking. So Surah 7 says he created you from a single soul. So that might be a reason to work for peace, because people should live in harmony. Surah 23 says, say words of peace. So that's a very practical idea about peacemaking, isn't it? Obviously, Muhammad Ali said Islam is peace and not violence. So that is very much supporting the idea that a Muslim should work for peace. The hadith say God has appointed you his steward. So you could say part of that duty is to ensure peace in his world. And then Surah 8 says, if the enemy is inclined to make peace with them. So again, a really great quote to use if you are discussing peacemaking. And then talking of peacemaking, a organization working for peace is Islamic Relief. So you can use them, and they do an amazing job helping the victims of war as well, but also raising awareness of conflicts and of the need to resolve them in a peaceful way. So let's get started on the questions now, shall we? And we're going to start with some 1-mark questions. So our first one is on the screen for you now. If you have got the booklet in front of you, we are turning to page 6. Okay, you can have a go at the question now, and then obviously you've got space for any notes, any quotes that you might make. For each of the questions, I will be giving you quotes and extra information, just in case a question on that topic comes up that is 5 marks or 12 marks, for example. So I want this session to give you everything you need to know for theme D. So, obviously for a 1-mark question, you don't need to know quotes, but you may need to know them, or you will need to know them if this topic came up as a 12-mark or a 5-mark question. I hope that makes sense. So, which one of the following best describes the idea of accepting someone's apology and no longer blaming them? And of course, the answer is forgiveness. Remember, reconciliation is when you go that little bit further, you then rebuild the relationship. But with forgiveness, you're accepting the apology, you're moving on. Really important for both Christians and Muslims, because Jesus said, forgive not 7, but 77 times. The hadiths say that you should forgive others and then God will forgive you. God is the most forgiving and the merciful, according to Surah 39. I've got also there the words of the Our Father prayer that Christians were taught by Jesus. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. So again, this idea that if you forgive others, God will forgive you. And then finally, whoever makes reconciliation, his reward is from God. So the importance of forgiveness and indeed reconciliation. Okay, which one of the following describes why having nuclear weapons might prevent war? And this is one of our key terms. It is that they act as a deterrent. Now, just a bit of trivia for you, just in case you wanted to know. This is how many nuclear weapons the nuclear weapon owning countries, if I can call them that, have. So Russia has the most nuclear weapons in the world, over 5,900, followed by the US with 5,400. So they together obviously have the most nuclear weapons. China, France, the UK also have, you know, several hundred nuclear weapons. I also think a significant one, of course, is North Korea, who we do see sometimes in the news, don't we, with Kim Jong-un, their dictator, and they actually have 20 nuclear weapons. So, you know, this is a really contentious issue, as we know at the moment. What can we say about nuclear weapons? Well, obviously the 10 commandments, they do not kill, and we know that they will kill a lot of people, especially if they lead to mutually assured destruction. Surah 2 says, fight in God's cause against those who fight you. So you should use the weapons you have, but do not transgress. You know, are these weapons going to go too far? Martin Luther King Jr. would say the only weapons we should use are the weapons of love. St. Paul, however, says submit to the governing authorities. You know, if you live in Russia, the USA, China, France, the UK, North Korea, you should be following what your government has decided. You know, you should submit to their decisions. And if they believe nuclear weapons are needed, you should be getting on board with that. And so, you know, there are just a few quotes that you could use when talking about this topic. Okay, let's move on to a 2-mark question now, shall we? Remember, with 2-mark questions, all that you need is 1 sentence for 1 mark. We are literally looking for bullet points of the length I've got on the screen here. If you put 2 of those down in your answer, or as your answer, I should say, you will get the 2 marks, you know? So if you are writing in the booklet, you do not need to use more than 1 line per mark. That's all you need to do. So you could literally put, Holy War is about defending religion. Holy War should be declared by a religious leader. Holy War should have the intention to protect religious people. Holy War should be the last resort. There you go. 2 of them, 2 marks. Really simple. When it says give, you're literally writing me 1 sentence, 1 line that just gives the belief. We save the explanation and we save the detail for later on. Okay, so another 2-mark question, just so we can practice this habit of giving a 1-sentence answer. Give 2 conditions of just war theory. So you could choose, it has a just cause. It is declared by a legitimate authority. There is a reasonable chance of success. The ultimate aim is to bring peace. The force used is proportional, and innocent civilians are not targeted. Okay, so just start to think as well, you know, how do you meet that criteria? Would weapons of mass destruction, for example, meet that criteria? So we've got to, you know, not only know what just war theory is, but we've got to think about its application as well. And we'll start to talk about that more later. But they are just 6 of the criteria for just war theory, that a war could be seen as a just war, that it would meet what the Catechism of the Catholic Church says are the strict conditions for a war to be justifiable, to be just. Okay, and then another 2-mark question for you. So again, we are just giving, you know, our really simple answers, our bullet point answers, 2 bullet points for 2 marks. Give 2 ways in which religious believers try to help victims of war. So this is a very practical thing, isn't it? So you're saying, donate money to charity, doing charity work yourself, volunteer work, raising awareness of what's going on, helping to house refugees, and working with individuals to help them rebuild their lives. And I've just put there, just to help us with our broader revision, that Christian Aid and Islamic Relief are 2 charities that do this, that are religiously inspired, that are led by religious believers, who go out to help the victims of war. And as you can see, those bullet points, again, really concise, really, really simple. It's so easy to get the marks for these 2 markers. Just give me 2 bullet points and you will get 2 marks. And they are obviously very practical things there, aren't they? Okay, we're going to move on now to some 4-mark questions. So remember, for a 4-mark question, you're going to be asked to give either contrasting or similar beliefs about something. This first one is to give 2 contrasting religious beliefs about war. So what quotes could we use here? What scripture might we refer to? Well, Surah 2 says, fight in the way of God, those who fight you, but do not transgress. What else have we got for Islam on here? Muhammad Ali, however, says Islam is peace and not violence. So he says, you know, you should never fight. He is a pacifist. Surah 17 says, do not take life which God has made sacred. And then we have the key concept in Islam of the lesser jihad, which is the idea of the outer struggle to defend Islam. The greater jihad is the inner struggle. The lesser jihad is that idea of an outer struggle to defend the religion. So are there times when war may be acceptable? It may be necessary. For example, holy war for the defense of the religion. For our Christian quotes then, we've obviously got Jesus saying, blessed are the peacemakers. So you could say war is wrong, you should work for peace. Although if the ultimate aim of the war is to restore peace, could it then be justified in accordance with just war theory? 10 Commandments, do not kill, obviously going to say war is wrong because it's going to involve death. However, St. Paul does say submit to the governing authorities. And so if your government has declared war, do you not need to support it and back them? And then the Catechism of the Catholic Church says that there are strict conditions when war is justified in accordance with that just war theory. So how do we apply this in the exam? So what are our Christian beliefs in support of war? Well, we can say the Catholic Church, so Catholic Christians would say a war can sometimes be justified by just war theory. The Catechism says there are strict conditions when it can be justified. For example, if the war has a just cause and a reasonable chance of success. We could also say many Christians will support a war if it has been declared by their government. So St. Paul, as we know, wrote to submit to the governing authorities. Therefore, Christians will support a war declared by their government and would contribute to the war effort if they are required to, because they are submitting literally to their governing authorities and the decisions made by Parliament, for example. Islamic beliefs in support of war, the lesser jihad in Islam means to defend Islam from external threat, and so the Quran teaches Muslims to fight in the way of God, those who fight you. So also for self-defense there, so to defend the religion, defend your community. Surah 9:5, as we've said, has been used to justify religious war because we read, kill the polytheists wherever you find them. And of course, that is based on the context in which the Quran was first compiled. When Islam first began, there were many people who are what we call polytheists. So obviously Islam is a monotheistic religion, the worship of one God. There were many people worshipping many gods. And so this means Muslims may support wars that are fought in order to defend Islam. Of course, with these answers, we must always make sure we're saying some Muslims, some Christians, or many Christians. So we're not making assumptions about, an entire religion. We have to make sure we're including that some or many in our responses, just so the examiner knows we're aware of the differences and the diverse viewpoints and interpretations within a religion. And also you could say Muslims do support war because Muhammad fought in just wars. And he is our key exemplar and role model for Muslims to follow as the founder of Islam, as the perfect Muslim. However, we do need to remember it's a contrasting beliefs question, so you would need to give me an opposing view, a reason why religious people disagree with war. So if you wanted to pick a Christian belief, you'd say that Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, which many Christians believe means war should be avoided. You should work for peace, as Jesus taught them to do. You could say some Christians are pacifists, which means they are totally against war under any circumstances. Jesus' teaching to put your sword back in its place suggests war is never justified. You should never resort to violence. And then the 10 Commandments, they teach do not kill. War is therefore wrong because it involves killing. So really straightforward, really simple here, in our answers. How about our Islamic beliefs then? Well, Muslim pacifist Muhammad Ali said, as we know, Islam is peace and not violence. Therefore, war is wrong. We could say Muslims believe that the loss of innocent life is to be avoided, so war is wrong. The Quran teaches do not take life which God has made sacred. This is a risk in war, which often affects civilians. So we could link in the sanctity of life there. Also, God is the most merciful, so Muslims should try to be merciful in their own conduct. The Quran encourages Muslims to make peace with enemies if possible, to reconcile with them, so to avoid war. So war should only ever be a last resort, and it should come to an end immediately if you can reconcile instead. So, you know, we've got, again, a nice diversity of viewpoints. For your 4-mark question, remember, you just need one explained belief in support and then one explained belief to give the opposing, the contrasting belief. Otherwise, if it says explain 2 similar beliefs, you would be explaining 2 beliefs against war or 2 beliefs in support of war. Okay, let's move on to another question now. And this one is to explain 2 contrasting religious beliefs about violent protests. So what scripture could we use if we get a question on violent protest on our Theme D exam? Well, Martin Luther King said we must use the weapon of love. So that obviously goes against violent protest. And of course, you will know Martin Luther King Jr., just an extraordinary man. And in that fight for racial equality, he used that non-violent resistance. So his method was non-violence, and such an extraordinary man, an incredible, incredible human being. So he said we must use the weapon of love, not violence. Joseph Fletcher, you may know him. He's the man that we associate with situation ethics. He said the morality of an action is dependent on the circumstances. So actually, could we say violent protest is sometimes justified, you know, in certain circumstances, if that's the only way to stand up against something or prove your point, could it be justified? So we can't say it's always wrong. There could be certain circumstances when it's right. Surah 2, again, fight in the way of God those who fight you. So, you know, if you're protesting against religious discrimination, for example, or religious oppression, could that be a time when fighting, using violence, is justified? Jesus, for Christians, used violence, didn't he? He overturned the tables. He's the key role model for Christians. So does that show violence is, in some circumstances, the right way to protest? It is the best way to prove your point. However, Jesus also said, put your sword back in its place. Muhammad Ali said Islam is peace and not violence. And Surah 23 says, say words of peace. So let's have a look at applying this. Again, we're going to look at our supporting beliefs first, and then we'll look at our opposing beliefs after. So how would a Christian support violent protest? Well, Jesus, our key role model for Christians, violently protested against the commercialization of the temple, against the fact that people were selling things in the temple and making money in the house of God. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. And I've put here, this shows there are certain circumstances when Christians may support the use of violent protest. Christians may believe there are certain injustices which justify violent protest. For example, you could say against apartheid. It could be the most loving thing to do, situation ethics, of course, because it is for the greater good. And so I've then just added in there Joseph Fletcher, our main man of situation ethics, who teaches that the morality of an action is dependent on the circumstances. So situation ethics, the idea that Jesus taught to do the most loving thing, and so that's how Christians should make moral decisions in the modern world. In each situation, they should ask, what would Jesus do? What is the most loving thing? And Fletcher would say that there are certain circumstances, you know, when the most loving thing to do may well be to have to use violence. It depends on the circumstances. So in the exam, you might want to give an example of such circumstances when you think a theist would say violent protest is acceptable. What about our Islamic beliefs then? Well, violent protest, we could say, may be used to defend Islam, because Surah 2 says, fight in the way of God those who fight you. You could say it is the lesser of two evils, which is a key concept in Islamic law. It is the only way, you could say, to stop a much greater evil from continuing or taking place. So you could say it is the lesser of two evils, that you're fighting against something, you're using violence against something which is so much worse. And it's the only way to stop that thing that is so much worse. For example, apartheid. And then we can say the Prophet Muhammad fought in just wars. This shows there are times when violence is justified, as demonstrated by Muhammad himself. You'll see a lot of the key quotes and the key points I'm making are coming up again and again. That is very intentional, guys. Do not be afraid when you are revising to be looking for quotes that apply to multiple topics, because you can absolutely use them across the theme and indeed across the themes. Okay, your Christian beliefs that oppose violent protest then. So Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. Again, another very, very flexible and transferable quote. Christians must work for peace in non-violent ways. He also said, put your sword back in its place, a quote that we've become very familiar with as well. Christians must not use violence to achieve their goals. They should put their weapons back. The Ten Commandments state do not kill, and violent protest risks endangering human lives. So again, it's going to be wrong. Martin Luther King was a pacifist Christian who used non-violence. He said that peace can only be achieved through peaceful means. He taught that humans, let's all say the quote together now, must use the weapon of love. So he's a fantastic role model, fantastic example against violent protest and still achieving your goals, that peace can only be achieved through peaceful means. What about your Islamic beliefs then that oppose violent protest? Violent protest may endanger innocent human life. The Quran teaches do not take life, which God has made sacred. So again, the sanctity of life argument. The Quran teaches Muslims to say words of peace. This means working for peace, whereas violent protest may cause greater unrest or greater disharmony. So Muslims should try to resolve conflicts through peaceful means, not violent protest. And then, of course, Muhammad Ali, who was a Muslim pacifist, and said, Islam is peace and not violence. So I would say not violence includes not violent protest, which is why that is a belief violent protest is wrong. Okay, another 4-mark question for you. Our last 4-mark question. I'm sure you're very happy to hear. By the way, guys, make sure you've got some snacks. Make sure you've got a green tea or something on the go, a few Maltesers, a few nibbles. Anyway, let's keep going. We're now going to do a similar belief. Okay, so this is where the two beliefs that you're explaining are similar. And we're being asked to explain two similar religious beliefs about peacemaking. Now, remember, peacemaking is a very practical thing, isn't it? It's not beliefs about peace itself. It's about working towards peace, working for peace. So it's a very practical thing. So this is where we'll be able to talk about Pax Christi, Christian Aid, Islamic Relief, for example. So Surah 23 says, say words of peace, which is a very practical thing to do. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. So I think that is the perfect quote for this question. St. Teresa of Avila said, Christ has no body but yours. So again, the idea that Jesus was the Prince of Peace. You must represent him in the world, that you must perform those good deeds and those good works that work for peace. Muhammad Ali, let's all say it together, said Islam is peace and not violence, whereas St. Paul wrote, live at peace with everyone. So again, that really, really powerful quote that you should be living at peace with everyone, which is why peacemaking is important. Surah 7, God created you from a single soul, which is, a similar sentiment, isn't it? God's created you from a single soul. You should all live together in harmony. And then Surah 8, don't know why this one's in speech marks, but hey, let's go with it. If the enemy is inclined toward peace, make peace with them. So again, another quote about peacemaking, avoiding conflict. So what are our similar beliefs about peacemaking? Christians believe peacemaking is important, because Jesus taught Blessed are the peacemakers. So you are blessed. You will be welcomed into the kingdom of God if you work for peace. Christians try to put Jesus's teachings into action in their lives. So that is why it is a good thing. That's why it's important. Also, Christians believe peacemaking is important because St. Paul wrote to live at peace with everyone. And so Christians try to follow teachings such as this contained within the Bible, their holy book. You know, it's the infallible word of God. You need to live at peace with people. That's why, you know, peacemaking is important. You may want to talk practically about the work of Christian Aid or Pax Christi in terms of campaigning for peace and working for peace. Islamic beliefs then, Muslims also believe peacemaking is important because Surah 23 teaches to say words of peace. As this is commanded by the Quran, Muslims believe they have a duty to do this. Muslims also believe peacemaking is important because Islam is a religion of peace. Muhammad Ali said religion is peace and not violence. I think that quote's probably winning for the most uses so far. Muslims should therefore work to create a peaceful world as part of their role as good stewards over the planet. Look at that. I've even got a little link to theme B in there for you. Just thought I'd add that in there, a little something. Okay, let's move on to some 5-mark questions where these quotes really are important. Remember, to get that final 5th mark, you need to have referred to religion, you need to have referred to sacred writings, in your response. So, excuse me, my cushion's now fallen off my chair. Getting very excited about the 5-mark questions. So, let's see, what could we use? Explain 2 religious beliefs about why the use of violence is wrong. Refer to sacred writings or another source of religious authority in your answer. So, what could the quotes be? Well, blessed are the peacemakers. There it is. Our classic could definitely be used. Say words of peace. Surah 23 could be used. Put your sword back in its place could definitely be used. Do not take life, which God has made sacred, could definitely be used. I've added a cheeky extra one in here for you. I know. Turn the other cheek. Jesus. I know. Just another quote. Just throwing that into the mix if you want to spice things up a bit. Muhammad Ali, my favorite, Islam is peace and not violence. And then Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. I've tried to avoid using the golden rule so far, but sometimes I think it's nice to bring it in, you know. It's a classic, isn't it? So, what are our Christian beliefs? Why violence is wrong? Of course, we're making sure we've got our reference to scripture. So, we can say it's wrong because Jesus, who is known as the Prince of Peace, taught his followers, blessed are the peacemakers. Those who work for peace will be rewarded. So, you need to choose peace rather than violence. Jesus taught Christians to avoid the use of violence or seek revenge. Instead, Christians should love your enemies and turn the other cheek. And then we've also got there the golden rule. Christians are taught to love your neighbor. Do not cause harm to them. Do not use violence. You could also talk here about the sanctity of life, you know, and you can talk about the fact life is sacred and holy. Humans are made imago Dei. You could talk about the fact it says do not kill. Violence can lead to death. You know, so anything that is talking about why violence is wrong is going to be credited. How about our Islamic beliefs then? Well, Surah 23 teaches Muslims to say words of peace. This shows Muslims they should seek to resolve situations peacefully and they should work for peace rather than using violence. This reflects the fact Islam is a religion of peace. And then I've got here, all people are created equally by God. They should therefore be treated with respect and value, which means avoiding harming them. So you don't want to use violence against them, it will harm them. And I've said Surah 7 teaches that God created you from a single soul, so people should work to bring about harmony and care for one another, recognizing their oneness as one humanity. Okay, another 5-mark question for you now, and then we're going to move on to our 12-mark questions. We're doing very well, guys. We're doing very well. So, explain 2 religious beliefs about peace. Refer to sacred writings or another source of religious authority in your answer. So, again, guys, listen, these quotes, we should all be able to recite them now without me even needing to read them off the screen. But let's keep repeating them. It's very good for our memory. It's very good for our recall in the exam that we've gone through them several times. So, blessed are the peacemakers was, of course, Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount. live at peace with everyone is, of course, St. Paul. Say words of peace is, of course, Surah 23 and then Surah 7. God created you from a single soul. A new quote for you, seek peace and pursue it, is from Peter. Muhammad Ali, a classic, said Islam is peace, not violence. And then Surah 8, if the enemy is inclined toward peace, make peace with them. So, how are we applying this? Jesus, the key figure in Christianity, taught in the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the peacemakers, in case you didn't know by now. This teaches Christians the importance of working for peace and that they will be rewarded by God for doing so. This inspires organisations such as Pax Christi to work for world peace. And then St. Paul taught in his letter to the Romans to live at peace with everyone. This teaches Christians they need to work for peace in the world. This might be achieved through avoiding conflict and forgiving enemies. Lovely. And then how about your Islamic beliefs? Well, peace has importance in Islam, in case you didn't know by now. The Quran, the infallible word of God, teaches Muslims to say words of peace. This reflects the fact Islam is a religion of peace. Muslims have a duty to work towards it. Muslims believe that God created you from a single soul, and so people should make peace and live in harmony where possible. This includes making peace with your enemies where possible. Okay, so it's time for some 12-mark questions. Now, really important that we get these 12-mark questions right and that we are consistently getting 10, 11, 12 out of 12 so we can maximize our chance of getting a grade 9. Remember, in the AQA GCSE, half of your marks are coming from these 12-mark questions. So it is essential that we are smashing them. So I have used throughout this video many quotes. So any of the topics we've already covered, you will be able to get those top marks in a 12-mark question because we've already looked at some key quotes and key beliefs for those topics. But for the two 12 markers we're going to look at, I really want us to focus on thinking, how do I get 12 out of 12? How am I going to show that examiner I am a grade 9 student? So our first one is this statement. Everyone should be a pacifist. And we, of course, have got to give reasons a religious person would agree with that statement, reasons a religious person would disagree. I think it can be very easy with these questions when it doesn't actually have religion in the statement to go off on a bit of a tangent and forget you're doing an RE exam. I really want to urge you to make every point relevant to religion. And the way we do that is by using our key quotes, by using our references to scripture, because that keeps us grounded in religious evidence, which shows the examiner we are an expert in this subject and we are worthy of that grade 9. So the quotes that we could be considering: do not take life which God has made sacred. Do not kill, obviously the 10 commandments. Use weapons of love. A new quote that we are bringing in is this from the Quakers, who are a group of Christians who, as they say here, utterly deny all outward wars. I don't know why I've put wars. Excuse me. I must have been falling asleep by the time I got to this slide. That should say wars. If anyone has purchased this PowerPoint, it will be updated, I promise you, by the time you've opened it. I've only just noticed that. That's terrible. Which actually reminds me, you've got to check your spelling, punctuation and grammar in your 12-mark questions because you do get marks for that. So there we go. That's the reason I did it. Let's pretend there was an idea behind the madness. So yeah, the Quakers are a group of Christians who are pacifists. They are conscientious objectors. They would not take part in wars. They would say, no, it is against my beliefs. It is against my religion. Muhammad Ali, as we know, said Islam is peace and not violence. So he was a pacifist. He was a Muslim pacifist. Jesus said, put your sword back in its place. So again, against the use of violence, you shouldn't fight. However, Surah 2 says, fight in the way of God those who fight you, but do not transgress. St. Paul said, submit to the governing authorities. So if your government has decided you're going to war, you better get on board with it. And then the Catechism of the Catholic Church says there are strict conditions when war is justified. So no, a Catholic would not be a pacifist because there are certain circumstances, there are strict conditions when actually war should be supported, when you should get on board, so to speak, with war. For example, it is the last resort, it's declared by a legitimate authority, it has a just cause, there is a reasonable chance of success, the aim is to bring peace, the violence is proportional, and innocent civilians must not be targeted. And they are our criteria for a just war. So how would we answer this question? I would want to see a really balanced argument followed by a concise, clear conclusion. So in the booklet, if you are following along in our booklet, we are on page 16, and you can see here I've put in the booklet a little table for you, just so we can visually see we need that balanced argument. We want a really strong case for agreeing with the statement, and we want a really strong case for disagreeing with the statement. I'm looking for 2 agree, maybe 3, 2 disagree, maybe 3, and then I'm looking for a conclusion at the end. So what points could I make to agree with this statement? Well, Quaker Christians would agree. Quakers are a Christian denomination who believe in pacifism. They utterly deny all outward wars and believe all conflict should be solved in a non-violent way. So they would say, yes, everyone should be a pacifist. There's no excuse not to be. The 10 Commandments state do not kill. Wars inevitably involve the loss of life. For example, up to 85 million people during previous world wars. Therefore, some Christians may believe everybody should be a pacifist in order to protect life. Jesus taught, blessed are the peacemakers. Some Christians think this means everybody should work for peace, which may mean opposing war under any circumstances. They may say you cannot achieve peace through war. As we know from Martin Luther King, he said peace can only be achieved through peaceful means. Jesus taught, put your sword back in its place. Some Christians believe this shows everybody should always find non-violent solutions to conflicts. Jesus is seen by some Christians as a pacifist, yes, so as the key role model. He is seen by Quakers, for example, as modeling pacifism. He did not fight in a war. We don't have that in the New Testament. He taught to turn the other cheek. Christians should do the same. And then finally, we know that Martin Luther King was a Christian pacifist who taught that we must use the weapons of love. He taught that the only way to achieve peace is through peaceful means. So that would be a reason to agree everyone should be a pacifist. How about our reasons to disagree then? So many Muslims believe there are times when war may be justified. For example, to defend the Islamic religion, Surah 2 teaches to fight in the way of God those who fight you. This teaches Muslims that violence can sometimes be necessary. A holy war, for example, would be justifiable. Many Muslims believe that fighting in wars is sometimes justifiable, so everyone should not be a pacifist because Muhammad, the key exemplar, the key role model, himself fought in just wars for the sake of defending Islam. So whilst peace is important, Muhammad's example shows fighting may sometimes be the only option or the right option in those circumstances. Many Christians believe there are certain circumstances when war is justified. The Catholic Church, as we know, teaches there are strict conditions when war can be justified. For example, when there is a just cause and as a last resort. These are derived, as we know, from St. Thomas Aquinas's just war theory. So pacifism is therefore not always practical. There are circumstances when war is just, when it can be justified under certain conditions, when it's fought in a certain way for certain reasons. And then finally, Christians believe you cannot be a pacifist if the government declares a war. So you could quote St. Paul as saying, submit to the governing authorities. This means there may be times when you have a duty to fight on behalf of your country. Now, Quakers would say you do not. You should be a conscientious objector, but you could use St. Paul's quote there to say, if your government decides there's going to be a war, you must submit to that decision. You must support your government's decision and aid the war effort. So no, everyone cannot be a pacifist. And then remember, do not forget, we want your conclusion. In conclusion, I personally agree or disagree with the statement because, and then give me a really clear 1-sentence conclusion that brings your 12-mark answer to a really strong close. And then your examiner can be confident you deserve that grade 9. Okay. One more 12 marker and then we're done. We're doing very well, guys. We're ready for a lie down. We're ready for a nap. So Let's do this one. It is weapons of mass destruction. It's a contrasting beliefs topic. So you could also get it, as a question 3, but you could also get it for your question 5 here. So the use of weapons of mass destruction is never acceptable. So again, this is an interesting statement because it's saying there are never, ever the circumstances, or it can never be justified. And we're going to be agreeing with that, why they are always wrong. But then we also need to give the counter argument. We need to also say why they can be justified. Now, interesting as well, the question says the use of them. This is not about having them as a deterrent. This is about having them and actively using them. So the United Nations says nuclear weapons are the most dangerous weapons on Earth. So that's looking promising, isn't it? That's looking very good. So glad we've got thousands of them in the world. The 10 Commandments, they do not kill. That would say they cannot be used because they are going to kill on a massive scale. However, St. Paul says submit to the governing authorities. So, for example, the UK government and the Trident nuclear programme, we should support their decision because that is what Parliament has decided. Do not take life, because God has made it sacred. Again, weapons of mass destruction will take a lot of life if they are used. God has appointed you his stewards. So again, being mindful they wouldn't just destroy life, they'd destroy the planet. That idea of mutually assured destruction if used. Pope Benedict XVI said that in a nuclear war, there would be no victors, only victims. So that would say they can never be used. And then Surah 2, a little bit ambiguous on this again. Fight in the way of God those who fight you, but do not transgress. So are they going too far? Are these weapons going too far if we use them? So let's have a look at both sides of that argument. So we could say these are reasons to agree. Many Christians oppose the use of weapons of mass destruction because they do not meet Thomas Aquinas's just war criteria. They're not proportional, for example, and obviously proportional means that they match the severity of their cause, if that makes sense. So, there is no cause that could justify these weapons because they are so destructive. There is nothing for which there'd be a proportional response, So, for example, I don't know, if you forgot your pencil at school and your teacher, gave you 20 hours worth of detention and no, not even that, they permanently excluded you for forgetting your pencil or something like that, you could say, I don't really think that's proportional, so it's if that makes sense. So it's where your response is proportional to what's happened to cause your response. I feel like I've explained that really badly. If anyone's got a better way of explaining what proportional means, do let me know in the comments. Do share it with us. Share your wisdom. Save me. I've been talking for too long. And it leads to the death of innocent civilians, potentially on a massive scale. Many Christians oppose their use because they cause such widespread death, which goes against the commandment, do not kill. I mean, for example, when they were used at the end of World War II, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki nuclear attacks killed an estimated 340,000 people. So, it's death on a mass scale. Many Muslims oppose the use of these weapons because their use is disproportional. Surah 2 says, do not transgress, don't go too far when fighting. We can say they do go too far. They go beyond reasonable bounds because they lead to the indiscriminate loss of civilian life. You're not killing people who are involved in the combat. It's not like combat. Obviously, I'm no army expert, guys, as you know, but it's not like we've got a one-on-one. You've got one bomb killing hundreds of thousands of innocent people. And so we could say, no, they can never be used because they go too far. They transgress bounds. Many Muslims oppose their use because of that widespread loss of life. Again, Surah 17, do not take life, which God has made sacred. Their use inevitably leads to the loss of human life, so it's not acceptable to use them, especially innocent life. I think that's the emphasis to make, isn't it? It's going to lead to the mass loss of innocent life, innocent civilians. And nuclear weapons are the most dangerous weapons on earth, we are told by the UN. One can destroy a whole city and cause widespread environmental damage. Being a good steward means caring for the world, not destroying it. And so you might want to link in there the Hadith, for example, or even Genesis 2, where it says God put man in the garden to take care of it. Are you taking care of it if you're causing mutually assured destruction and blowing up the whole planet? I don't think so, do you? So then reasons people disagree with the statement, we've got to give those reasons, guys, why people would disagree and say, actually, there are times they can be used. So some Christians could disagree because there may be circumstances when they're acceptable under just war theory, under just war criteria. So we can argue back against that. For example, if their use is as a last resort, it has a just cause, maybe you're using them to promote good with the aim of restoring peace and justice. So, for example, their use in World War II, that the aim was to bring an end to the war, wasn't it? And so could you say that actually in certain circumstances, they can be used as weapons of last resort? Some Christians may disagree with the statement because national governments use them as part of their defence strategy. For example, the UK government uses Trident. St. Paul said, submit to the governing authorities. When we have a new prime minister in the UK, one of the first things they have to do is agree to the use of nuclear weapons. They have to agree, they have to be prepared to use them. They have to say, yes, I am prepared to authorize their use. So if our government says that, there are times when we would need to use them and we need to be ready to use them, our prime minister needs to be ready to authorize them. St. Paul says, submit to the governing authorities. So Christians should support their use if the government believed it was appropriate. It is, for our government to decide that. And so we have the weapons ready to use. Surely that suggests the government believes there are cases when they would be acceptable to use. Or why spend billions of pounds maintaining them? Some Muslims may disagree with the statement because they could be used in self-defense. If somebody uses nuclear weapons on you or weapons of mass destruction on you, why can you not use them in return? Fight in the way of God those who fight you. This shows they have an important role to play in self-defense. So you could say it is acceptable in self-defense. To defend yourself if somebody uses them against you. And then that final point really consolidates that. There are scenarios when they could or should be used as weapons of last resort. For example, a country attacks first. So really interesting at the moment, isn't it, of course, in the current global climate that we're in, to think about this and to think about the use of such weapons. Of course, you need to remember your conclusion. We want to have a nice conclusion, just one sentence, 2 sentences maximum at the end of your response, just to bring it all together and to show that you've considered both sides of that argument, but then you've made your decision and you've reached your conclusion and your informed judgment. So we can get 12 out of 12. Okay, so that brings us to an end. Thank you for joining me. I need to lie down. I don't know about you. All that's left for me to say is thank you for watching and very, very best of luck with all of your studies and your revision. Thank you for joining me. Any questions, any comments or feedback, let me know in the comments below. Have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.